So welcome everyone to the Certified Prevention Specialist, CPS, Application and Exam Preparation Overview. I am Lisa Mason with T-Task, the Training and Technical Assistance Service Center funded by DEMIS. David, you want to say hi?
Yeah, good morning. It's David Reyes, also from T-Task. Welcome to our training.
Thank you. So we, in the past, would divide this training into two parts, just the application and just the exam. And what we found is people would come seeking both, with questions for both. So we decided to combine them. And you're welcome to attend this as many times. You're welcome to check it out, online when we upload it to YouTube, our YouTube channel, and we will be sending you the presentation slides, a link to the recording. And if I'm able to, I'm going to create a resource list with links to the different resources that we're going to be talking about. There's going to be resources already embedded in this presentation. Okay, let's see if I can move this out of the way. Okay. So prevention, here's an early definition of prevention: the act, assertive process of creating conditions and or fostering personal attributes that promote the well-being of people. This is from William Lofquist, one of the early writers of prevention, who wrote a book called Discovering the Meaning of Prevention back in 1983. And you'll notice I highlighted some words. One is process, that prevention isn't a one-time event. It's an ongoing process. And it's both fostering personal attributes, helping people develop the information and skills, as well as creating conditions, environmental conditions, conditions in families, schools, peer groups, neighborhoods, communities, and society as a whole. So this is an early definition of prevention. And please interrupt with questions if you have them. And then the evolution of prevention. And one of the things you can be thinking about is we talk about these really quickly is looking for, what are personal attributes that we're trying to develop and what are more conditions. So we first started with prevention, teaching information about substances. And we have ATOD, which is an older term meaning alcohol, tobacco, and other drug. And you may see that when you're reading some older prevention materials. And what we were teaching with that information was the harms and the consequences, legal consequences that were associated with using substances, especially if you're underage or they're illegal substances. And then we expanded to teach information and skills, and some of the skills we were teaching was decision-making, peer resistance, and some folks like Gilbert Botvin, who has the Botvin Life Skills curriculum, he was one of the first to start talking about stress management coping skills, along with, how do I make the decision whether to use, how do I deal with peers? And when we started with teaching skills, we realized that some teachers are going to need some assistance with that. So teacher information and teacher training started. Then we went beyond that to expand school prevention efforts. We saw schools as sort of the hub of the prevention work in the community, because that's where kids were. And we went beyond teaching a curriculum to include looking at policy. What is the policy if a kid uses alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs? And can we include some intervention opportunities with those? And peer-led prevention, youth leaders, student assistance programs, which were really popular in the 90s and have sort of fallen by the wayside, but really formalizing a helping intervention process with kids. And we've sort of shifted that to more community-based organizations. And then we shifted as we started doing more and more research, expanding to community-led prevention efforts. Instead of expecting schools to be the leaders, it was like, no, we need community partners to make this happen. And we sort of transferred the ownership from schools to the community itself. And this is where we engage multiple organizations and volunteers to share their ideas and the prevention work. And where we are today is we're continuing that community-wide prevention, and we're incorporating data and evidence-based strategies. And many of you are familiar with the Strategic Prevention Framework, or the SPIF, the public health planning model we use. And we are developing coalitions to share data, expertise, resources, and ownership of prevention. It doesn't belong just to one group. And we're using data to identify our priority substances and risk and protective factors, and then selecting evidence-based strategies to target those risk and protective factors. And then this is something that will be familiar to many of you, but if you're new to prevention, and I'm going to see if I can move this screen sharing thing. Yeah, there we go. The Institute of Medicine continuum of care of behavioral health. And what I did was I attached or inserted the stages of use at the bottom of this. And so some of us call this the protractor of prevention, but you'll notice on the left that we're starting with promotion, health promotion, and then we go into prevention and we talk about universal prevention. That's prevention for everybody. Selective prevention is more tailored to meet the needs of young people and others who may have certain risk factors. And then indicated is for people who have begun using substances and maybe showing some behavioral change or having some consequences. And then we go to the right side of the protractor and we start talking about treatment. And that's for people whose use has caused difficulty for them. And we talk about the different kinds of treatment and then recovery, hopefully supporting people who are in recovery, who have a problem with alcohol or other substances, and helping them to be healthy and substance free. And in the bottom, you'll notice the stages of use that we start with no use, when somebody isn't using substances at all. And the reality is 1/3 of people don't use any alcohol, about 1/3 of the population. And for a lot of kids, that's the case, no use. And it's interesting that our school surveys are, are giving us data on this about how many kids are not using it. And it's often the majority of kids. And then we get to, and so promotion and prevention works for those no use people. Then we get to experimentation, where we try it once or twice to see if we like it or not. And if we don't like it, we're going to stop. If we like it, we may continue. And again, prevention is working there. And prevention is working with social and regular use in terms of, for adults anyways, maintaining the social norms that we have as a community have, or a society have. And we're using it in a regular way, but it's not causing problems for us. And young people often have social norms around their use as well. And I do not want to give the impression that it's okay for kids to be social using. We're really trying to prevent kids from using substances until the age of 21, because we know how sensitive the brain is. The developing adolescent brain, how much more vulnerable it is to substances and addiction. So every year we wait until 21, we are decreasing the risk of addiction for them. So just want to be clear about that. But then we get into the high risk problem use, which is where we're looking at the indicated and the treatment side, indicated prevention and treatment side of the protractor. And I put this up here because I want folks to understand why prevention isn't going to be as effective with these folks, because they need different kinds of messages and different kinds of supports. And then we get into addiction and hopefully recovery for folks. And those populations can be exposed to prevention messages and may learn some stuff, but it's not sufficient to meet their needs. Does that make sense to folks? And I'd be happy to talk with this more. So what is prevention? The term prevention is typically used to represent activities to stop or reduce an action or behavior. Still, it can also represent activities that promote a positive action or behavior while reducing risk. Research has found that successful prevention efforts must reduce risk factors and promote protective factors to ensure the well-being of children and families. Protective factors are conditions in families and communities that, when present, increase the health and well-being of children, families, and communities. And risk factors are conditions that increase the likelihood. They don't guarantee it, but they increase the likelihood. And the more risk factors a person has, the more that, the higher that possibility of negative outcomes. And one of the things we know is protective factors can help mitigate against risk factors, that we don't necessarily have to know what the risk factors are for kids. Just offering protective factors can make a difference for a lot of kids. Okay, so we wanted to give you that little background in prevention. And hang on just a minute. Hey, David, I'm going to let you keep an eye on people's faces. And if they all fall asleep, will you give me a yell?
Yep.
That way I don't clutter the screen.
Okay.
So prevention specialist, a certification for your career in your community. One of the things the CPS does is it acknowledges prevention as a profession. For a long time, people thought prevention folks were those nice people who organize midnight basketball games and, do mock car crashes and safe graduations. They thought of us as event planners more, who happen to, teach about alcohol and drugs. But what we've done is we require a specific set of knowledge and skills necessary to do our work. And we see our work, and others see our work, as prevention. And if I can find the IC and RC, International Certification Reciprocity Consortium, who manages this whole thing, put out an interesting article. It's 10 years old, 12 years old, but it talks about prevention as a critical part of healthcare reform. And I will email you that if I can find out where I found it on the web. But anyways, our work is research backed. It's data driven, and we have evidence-based strategies, activities that we do that are based on science, that are based on thorough research. As a profession, we have a code of a code of ethics that guides our prevention work. And when you sign for your certification, sign that application, and take that exam, you are basically saying, I will adhere to what those ethics are. And we are happy to give you that code of ethics if you don't already have it. And I think one of the things for me and for other folks in this field is one of the great benefits of prevention is we don't get stuck in what doesn't work. We are working in a place of hope and growth for individuals and families and communities. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat or just feel free to unmute yourself and ask. We'll be happy to do that. To address your questions as we go. So prevention specialist, again, a certification for your career and your community. The CPS is internationally approved certification, adopted in 1994. So you'll see it's fairly recent. For those of us of a certain age, it's probably old to some of you who are younger. It has all 50 US states plus territories and other countries offer a reciprocal prevention specialist credential, which means if you get certified we had this happen in New Hampshire, and they've moved to Connecticut and want to get certified here, they just have to contact the Connecticut Certification Board, provide evidence of that, and they're certified here. requires prevention professionals to demonstrate specific competencies, knowledge, and skills through work experience, education, supervision, and the passing of a rigorous exam. And the International Certification and Reciprocity Consortium is the group that manages that exam and manages the overall certification process. Connecticut Certification Board is the group in Connecticut that manages it here. And you can click on anything that's highlighted in this funny green color and it will take you to a link. So what are the benefits? Why become? Because CPS, because it ensures public safety and well-being through quality programs and that code of ethical conduct that protects service, protects the consumers of our services. So we're making sure we're doing the latest evidence-based strategy, that we have a thorough understanding of prevention theory, what works, what doesn't work. It enhances public accountability by employing staff who demonstrate proficiency with these competence-based standards. We are stewards of public money, many of us who are funded with either state, federal grants, or even private foundation grants. So we want to be the best stewards of that money and maximize those limited resources. And also, to remain a CPS, to renew it, you have to engage in ongoing professional development, continuing ed, to stay current with new and emerging trends and the best practices. So that's how it protects the community. Now, the CPS application is based on 6 prevention performance domains, and that's 6 groupings of the different competencies, knowledge, skills, and behaviors that a prevention person needs to do their job. And it's developed from an IC and RC prevention job task analysis that was last done in 2013. And my understanding was they were doing that again. I know they were seeking people to help with that process, maybe just before the pandemic, where they periodically review the work that we do and update both the job analysis and the prevention application and exam to make sure it's consistent with the work that we're doing. And you can review the full list of domains and the competencies in this prevention job task analysis. And we've given you a link to that, but we're going to provide information on that. The Connecticut Certification Board is a member of the ICRC. It's the group that administers the CPS application process that certifies someone to sit for the international exam. They also do Connecticut Alcohol and Drug Counselor certification, Connecticut Problem Gambling Counselor certification, as well as some other certifications. They ensure that the training that TTask and other vendors provide, it meets the established standards for prevention training. And there's 2 applications that people fill out. One is a registry application that asks for your education, your work history, your personal dynamics. That gets you into the system. They assigned you a number, a case number, and then you fill out a prevention specialist, which documents your work history, asks for professional references and training documentation. And we have a link to the certification board right here. And oh, Bellish. Okay. And this is a beautiful graphic that David created for us that takes you through the process. For those of you who appreciate visual, we start with, completing the registry application under number 1 with a fee. Then we go to 2A, reviewing and completing the CPS application. Then we go to 2B, looking at making sure we have the required elements, including the training. Then 3, we submit that application, pay a fee. 4, they give us permission if they pass us to take the exam and help us set that up. we prepare for the exam, take that, and then we get on number 6, our CPS. It's good for 2 years, and then we pay a renewal fee. It says $5. We'll have to update that. I think it's more than that. I'm pretty sure.
It's 50.
Thank you.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then the path to certification. Is this where you're jumping in, David? I forget. Or am I still going?
Yeah, yep.
Okay.
It's right now. Yeah,
Okay.
so yeah, the path to certification in step 1. Thank you, Margaret. Yeah, you'd complete your, again, this is just an overview, like a kind of like in-depth review of each step that you'd take. You'd complete the CT Cert Board registry application. That application must be notarized. You'd include that $75 fee, and then you'd await receipt of the registry number that's required for the certification application. And then in the next step, when you review and complete your CPS application, you would review those requirements, which are on the next slide. Which are 2,000 hours of prevention experiences across the 6 domains, and that's equivalent to 1 year of full-time work. Your education requirement, which is 100 hours of prevention-specific education, that include 50 hours of alcohol and drug-specific education, 6 hours of prevention ethics, and 6 hours of problem gambling prevention. And then you'd include your supervised practicum, which is 120 hours with a minimum of 10 hours in each of the 6 IC and RC prevention domains. And you can use 6 months of your work on your prevention job. And you would also include 3 professional references, which is in the next slide.
Question?
Yep.
In terms of the education or the training requirements, can you just go back to the last slide? Sorry. Yeah, all those hours of training and stuff. Does it all have to have been done like within this last, X years or months, or, how far back does that stuff go?
Lisa, you're muted.
Hi, Margaret. You can go back pretty far with that. What's important is that you can document it.
Yeah, that's of course going to be an issue, but yes.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
That's good to know. There's no like deadline for, or,
Yep.
expiration.
Yep.
Thanks.
Especially in this day of 1.5 hour trainings. It used to be when we were doing 6 hours trainings, or 5 hour trainings, it was easier to do that. Easier to accumulate the hours, but it takes a lot longer when we're doing virtual trainings. But anybody who's gone to any conferences, the National Prevention Network, CADCA, something more local, the New England School of Addiction Studies, those all count. So you can use those hours as well.
Great. And actually follow up. So then in terms of like supervised work experience, so that could be like, a year of your work, and then supervised practicum can be 6 months of your work.
Absolutely.
So like if you're in the same position for a while, you can just go, here's 1.5 years of it, like that counts for both.
Absolutely. Yep. What they wanted to have a supervised practicum, for people who were new entering the field, and also to make sure that you're getting experience in each of the domains. So you feel comfortable being able to work in those 6 different domains, that you've developed the skills and some knowledge. And all of this is not only to make sure you're well-rounded and you've got a background in prevention, but also you're prepared to take the exam.
I have a question. Lisa, what does that documentation look like that we're submitting that shows that we've worked 6 months?
Just your CEU certificate.
Okay. Yeah, I also just included that into the in the chat. It's on page 15 of the application. There's like a little table that you fill out, and then on top of that you would include in like an appendix all of the certification, all the CEU certs.
I have a question that's kind of related to the one that Belle has in the chat about the supervision piece. Does the person, what if your supervisor is not a CPS?
what a great question. They really like to see somebody who has a CPS, but if you don't have someone, you know, if your boss isn't or your director isn't, that's okay. That's where the professional recommendations come in. What they would love to see is somebody with a CPS write a recommendation on your behalf. And that recommendation is basically a checklist that you have experience in the different domains.
So could that be lateral? Like, could I have a CPS coworker that does that?
Sure.
piece?
Sure. Yep. Great
I have a
question.
question.
Yep.
So I am a certified health educator and spent the better part of the last decade, you know, writing curricula and teaching lots of this stuff. And I recently moved into higher ed, doing more specific prevention work on campus. So, you know, I've looked at this several times and thought about pursuing this certification. And one of the things I get stuck on is how do I, because I have a lot of experience in the prevention field because I've been teaching it for so long, but how do I go back and figure out how many hours were spent on this topic, how many hours were spent on this topic over the course of that, you know, that long career in K-12? Is that applicable to a certification like this? How do I kind of weed through it and figure out?
Great question. You can use coursework from bachelor or graduate school as part of your education. I'm not authorized to determine what is what, you know, what qualifies. What you would want to do is schedule, you know, either pose questions by email to the certification board or schedule even, you know, a Zoom meeting with them to say, hey, here's my transcript. What can I count towards? And they'll help you with that.
Okay. And in terms of the supervised work experience, does that work experience where I'm educating others relating, you know, to tobacco prevention, substance use prevention, addiction, mental health, etc., is that time that I have spent teaching in K-12 applicable to the supervised work experience? Or do I have to be in a position with a title and like specific prevention efforts? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I assume you were being paid to do that work, teaching.
Yes.
Yeah, you weren't just a volunteer. And you know, that's a great question. I don't know about volunteer work, if that would count. But yeah, that would count towards your work experience. Again, you want to make sure that you've got experience in the other domains as well, because what I'm hearing is you've got a lot of experience in domain number 2, prevention service and education, prevention, education, and service delivery, and probably some planning as well as communication skills, which is number 3. But you know, would you feel comfortable talking about like environmental, you know, strategies and policy and that stuff?
Got it.
Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Great questions, folks. And I think we'll move on to the next one, David.
Yeah.
Did you want to say anything else about this slide or?
I'm all set. I would actually just refer to the slide. I think it's 10 and just kind of go.
Is that before or after?
Before.
Okay.
It's the overview slide.
Keep going.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. There. Yeah, just there. And then in terms of, so I believe we were just going through the reviewing and completing the CPS application requirements. They're listed there. And then in step 2B, you have all of the education requirements. Those hours aren't specific to like the requirements. Those are just recommended hours. And then you'd submit your application and pay the filing fee of $175. The CCB will notify you once your application has been received. The CCB board members will notify you of your status and provide an update within 4 weeks. Upon approval, you're invited to take the exam, and you have about 90 days to take the exam. You have 90 days to complete the online candidate registration form and select a test date. And when you have to pay an exam fee of $300. The exam details, it's a computer-based exam. You're allotted 3 hours to complete the exam. It's 150 multiple choice exam, but only 125 questions count towards your score. 25 of those questions are like trial questions that they're just trying out and testing to see if they're appropriate for the exam. And then you just have to correctly answer 78 out of 125 to pass, which is just about 63% of the questions. And then as far as prepping for the exam, you should prepare in this format, or just like be mindful that 30% of the questions will be about planning and evaluation, 15% of the questions will be prevention, education, and service delivery, 13% will be on communication, 15% will be community organizing, 12% will be public policy and environmental change, and then 15% will be on professional growth and responsibility. In order to prepare for the exam, you could review an exam study guide that we'll discuss later on. You could complete practice exams that you have to pay for, and then just generally like ask like your CPS holding peers for guidance. Upon passing the CPS, it's issued and effective the following month, and the CPS must be renewed, which Lisa mentioned earlier. You must complete 20 hours of prevention-specific education yearly in order to renew your CPS, and CCB will email you 3 months before your credential expires, and include a renewal package, so they'll make it easy for you. And then you complete the renewal application and document the training for your renewal period, and pay that $50 fee that we were talking about earlier. But yeah, that's it.
Okay. So you've just gone through this.
Yeah.
Yep. Oops. Okay, I think it's my turn, right, David?
Mhm.
Okay, we emailed you a CPS specialist domains worksheet, which you can rate. You can either use it for note taking today, as we talk about the different domains, things you may want to write down. Oh, that's not, that's an area that I need to focus on to learn more about. But you can rate the domains from 1 to 4, 4 being high with your confidence level, and feel free to take notes on the domains as we discuss them. And we have some exam resource materials that we can share with you. And we will put the resource materials with each of the domains, so you can see which goes with what. There's a lot of, what's the right word, duplication. If you want to know more about the prevention domains, the New England PTTC, Prevention Technology Transfer Center, has developed a terrific short video series that talks about what do prevention specialists do, and it introduces the 6 prevention domains. And each video is anywhere from like 7 to 15 minutes long, where they have people with a lot of experience. They do interviews on the type of work, competencies, and skills and information that you need to be able to do this. And I really encourage people to watch it, to learn more about the domains. And I watched it recently, and I got stuff out of it. So it was really good. So performance domain number 1 is planning and evaluation. 30% of the exam is based on this one domain, and the majority, and that's because it is such a incredibly important area of what we do. And again, we're talking about prevention as an intentional process. How do we know what to do? How do we know if it works? Basically is the question we're answering here. And there's like a couple pages long here, but we've summarized it. It's being able to conduct a comprehensive community needs assessment. And as those of you who are familiar with the SPIF, the Strategic Prevention Framework, that's step 1, assessment. And it includes things like data literacy, assessing community readiness, identifying existing resources and gaps in a community. How do I do that? Knowledge of risk and protective factors and their identification through local data. What does the local data tell me about the risk and protective factors in this community? It's creating a prevention strategic plan, which for the SPIF is step 3, planning. Knowing about evidence-based prevention strategy, what works, what's affecting, selecting the best fit strategies that target risk factors and meet local needs. Conceptual fit is when we say we know from research that it targets risk factors, a strategy, and practical fit means our community can do this. We have the either the resources we need to do this or the willingness to develop those. And that prevention strategies, we want to have multiple ongoing strategies that reinforce each other. It's not just one thing that we do, but it's multiple strategies that reinforce and complement each other. And then another important part is developing an evaluation plan, the SPIF step 5. And that's knowing the difference between process evaluation, measuring what we're doing, how we're doing it, are we doing it the way it's intended, and outcome evaluation. Are we seeing changes in knowledge, attitudes, behaviors that we are hoping to see, that we set as goals? Adjusting the program based on, what our process evaluation is saying. For example, I'm working twice. I've worked with a coalition that picked out a particular risk factor that they wanted to address. They thought they had community support. And when push comes to shove, the community wasn't helping on that particular one. So we went back to the funder. Both times it was Demas. And we explained, the blocks and obstacles and asked for permission to shift gears because the community readiness wasn't there. And they said, absolutely, we want you guys to be successful. So that's what they did both times. They switched gears. And then experience some success focusing on another risk factor. And preparing progress reports and sharing success stories that help sustain prevention over time. So that's basically a quick review of what prevention performance domain number 1 is, planning and evaluation. And you'll notice 30%, that's the biggest allotment. So the most questions will be there. And here is a resource material list, things that we can provide from T-Task. And it's not on our T-Task list, but we can help you find those. And these are just some things you may want to read as you prepare for the exam. A lot of this stuff you already know. But these are all things that can help you with the exam. And we will be happy to help you find them. If you can't, I'm not going to go over all of them in depth. If you have questions, you can let us know as we go through these. Prevention performance domain number 2, 15%, prevention, education, and service delivery. And that's basically implementing and conducting the prevention activities. This is the fun part, right? This is why we get into prevention, to work with young people, families, community partners, and to be able to share what we've learned. And it's basically selecting and conducting those prevention education activities. It's making sure the content that we're providing is accurate, relevant to the audience, timely. That's where that continuing education is so important. Selecting content and curriculum that meets local needs and will work with a local audience, teaching the content or training others to teach content or curriculum, facilitating groups, whether it's a coalition or a group of young people like a youth council, and listening skills are just as important. Implementation fidelity, making sure we are implementing an evidence-based program the way it was designed, or if we're adapting it, being very careful about how we adapt it, that we don't lose the key elements in that. But being able to adapt it for diverse audiences with the support of diverse stakeholders. A really good example is when Danbury decided they wanted to make their student survey in Spanish because they had a significant population that spoke English as a second language. And so they worked with their local Hispanic speaking center, Hispanic Cultural Center, and they helped them translate the survey so they could get all youth to participate. And then doing a process evaluation, as we mentioned earlier, to making sure that we're implementing our programs with fidelity, the way they were designed. And so here are some resource materials that can help you with this. Okay, performance domain number 3, communication, 13%. This is about providing and exchanging information, individual, group, and mass communication, listening to concerns and hopes of the community, of the youth that you're working with. And communication is promoting our programs, our service, our activities, maintaining good public relations, listening, public speaking, facilitation skills, making information relevant to our audience. How do we tailor the message? And what is the message that's going to have the biggest impact with our audience? For example, we know youth generally aren't concerned about cancer and heart disease when it comes to vaping or smoking, but they are more concerned about how it may impact, their sports, the here and now kind of thing. And they're concerned about how alcohol and other drug use may impact their futures. But they're not worried about disease and stuff like that. Plan and implement community engagement. How do we engage different groups in our community? Facilitating meetings, report writing, social marketing campaigns, and then just interpersonal competence. How we're connecting and communicating with a wide variety of stakeholders, which is what we do. And then one of the new ones here is health literacy resources. In terms of the resource materials that we have here. Then we have performance domain number 4, community organizing. This is 15%, building a prevention system to continue the work, identifying and engaging prevention leaders and volunteers. And so community organizing is developing that community coalition, community partnerships to both identify our priority issues, our risk factors, select strategies, and do the work and maintain it. Identifying community demographics and norm. What makes my community unique? What are some of the needs of my community? Assessing their community readiness. They may be ready to do certain things, but not other prevention strategies. So what do we need to do to raise that and build capacity to help them get ready for that? Understanding the stages of change, where are they? And what do they need to be able to make some change and mobilize? Building relationship with different community leaders, supporting the coalition and mobilizing for community change, building coalition capacity. We use the formula capacity equals resources and readiness. What resources does a community have, and what do they need to develop, and where is that readiness level that I just mentioned? Building community ownership. Prevention shouldn't be the job of any one sector. It should be shared among people in the community. And we do that by cultivating coalition leadership. So it's not just us, the prevention professionals, that are seen as the leaders, but we want to get community folks. So they say, this is my program. I'm engaged in this. I own this. I'm invested in this. And then we have some different resource materials that you can use. Prevention performance domain number 5 is public policy and environmental change. And this accounts for 12%. And we want to make sure we're focusing on the environment along with that individual focus on young people and families, because we've learned from tobacco prevention and tobacco control, it's not enough just to teach information and skills. We need to change the environment that people are in as well. And we've done a phenomenal job with that, with tobacco. And so it's knowledge of public policy development and advocacy work, preparing and mobilizing the coalition and community member as change agents, knowledge of enforcement activities. What are some law enforcement activities that can support good prevention? Collaborating with our community partners on mutual goals. And what are media strategies to change the community norms and support policy change efforts? So that's a really important part of our work. And most DEMIS requires this, that we have at least,
I put the hot water in there.
okay, we're going to ask you to mute. Thank you. DEMIS is always asking for at least one environmental strategy, because we know it's easier to sustain things. Like an example is tobacco 21. When we raise the age to tobacco 21, we do that once and it's done. And so that's a strategy. We need to continue to support it through like merchant compliance checks and educating people. But, you know, eventually most people are going to know you can't buy unless you're 21. So that's one that helps to sustain change. And then the last one is professional growth and responsibility. And part of our ethics is making sure we are using that code of ethics that we've talked about, that we subscribe to that it governs our work, that if we have questions about whether something is appropriate, we either refer to that ethical code or we seek help for it. And I have talked with other folks have come to me about conflict of interest, and I've gone to other folks that I respect about, for example, a possible conflict of interest. Is this something I should be doing? So it's important to know those. It's adhering to legal, professional, ethical principles, having a knowledge of current prevention theory and practice, advocating for healthy and safe communities, advocating for health promotion across the lifespan, demonstrating knowledge of current issues, addiction, mental, emotional, and behavioral health. And we can provide you with information if you need. And also knowing the theories that back up the work we do, where the work came from, what's the research that helps back it up. And the reason we recommend knowing that is so you have a grounding when somebody says, well, why are we doing this and not that? We can explain, well, there's research that shows this is effective, but you know, this other thing that we discussed isn't as effective. So does it make sense for us to invest our resources, our time, and our funds into that? One of the things that the New England PTTC, Prevention Technology Transfer Center, created is an orientation roadmap onboarding book for new prevention specialists. And even if you're somebody with experience, you may want to look at this, or you may want to have it to be able to work to help orient new prevention folks. But we've given you a link for that, both in Word and as a PDF. And basically, it's a good review for reviewing for the prevention exam as well. You know, what are some of the critical things we need to know? So that can serve as a review for the exam as well as helping orient new people. And we've got the links to that. And now we're going to talk about the exam. But before we do that, are there any questions about you know, what we've talked about so far with the application or the performance domains? Okay, let's talk about the exam. So you have submitted your application, they have reviewed it, they have approved you, they have sent you a letter that you're approved, and you have permission to register for the exam, pay the fee to the certification board for the exam, and they will send you a what do you call it? A password, a username and password. So you can enter into the ICRC system and schedule your exam. It's a computer-based exam. You have 3 hours to complete it. Most folks take 2 to 2.5 hours. There's a quick tutorial before the exam and a survey at the end. And neither of these count towards the 3-hour time frame. These are in addition. And for somebody like me who never took a computer-based exam, it was really helpful to have that tutorial. The scores range from 200 to 800 with a 500 to pass. The exam has 150 question pool. They have more than that they pull from, but 125 of the questions count towards your score. The other 25 are test questions that don't count towards your score. They're actually testing new questions to see how people understand them, do they answer them correctly, and whether they should add that to the list of questions that count towards your score. And so if you see something that's a little wonky, it could be a test question. You need to successfully answer 78 out of the 125 to pass to get your 500 score. Personally, I would like to see them raise the score and make the questions a little more clear. I'm the type of person who wants to, let me show you what I know, rather than, trip me up with a funky worded question. Now, not all of them are. A few of them are. Some of them are. Some of them are pretty basic. The first one I answered, it was like, whoa, this is cake. I'm going to be fine. And then, of course, they got more complicated. Exam overview, multiple choice with 4 answers. There's no multiples, meaning that you can't say both A and C. You're going to pick either A, B, C, or D. It's possible that D may say A and C or all of the above. Okay. But you're not going to have to click on both A and C. Questions, many are fairly easy and you can answer these very quickly. And when you answer them, a little green light in the margin will go on by the question. So it's like, oh, I got that one done. If you're not sure, you can, hit a little yellow light that says, I want to go back to that. And anything you haven't answered or marked, green or yellow, is a red. So it makes it helpful. It makes it easy to go back and see what you got to do. So that's in the margin of the test. Some take more thinking, but could be figured out. It's like, yeah, I can answer. I know it's not A. I know it's not C. It's between B and D. And what we say with those is read through them 2 or 3 times and look for some key words or the context. Review choices when it says only, best, always. You can bookmark a question, mark it yellow and go back. And keep in mind, some of these are test questions. We found most people find many are fairly easy. Some take more thinking, but you can figure it out. And a small percentage were really difficult. Answer all the questions. There's no penalty for a wrong answer. They won't take points away. You only earn points. So it's better to guess. And don't do what I do. People recommend is don't go back and change your answers. Probably your first intuition is the correct one. I went back and changed some, and that probably wasn't such a good idea. I still pass though. All questions must be cited in a valid and reliable source. So they're just not making stuff up here. They're based in research, they've got a valid source behind the question. The percentage of exam questions are related to each of the 6 performance domains by their percentage, which we already talked about. You will get preliminary results immediately after the exam completion. The CCB staff will say, congratulations, you passed. You're going to get a formal letter, in a couple of days or a week or so. And if you didn't pass, they'll let you know that. First certification term lasts 2 years, and then you can renew it for 1, 2, or 3 years. And you have to get 20 CEUs per year after that for each renewal year. And you have to have 1 CEU of prevention ethics every time you renew. And you can take any one of our ethics modules. We offer 3 different courses right now. We're discussing whether we should have a 4th one. The 3 is 3 trainings of 2 hours each equals 6 hours to get the 6 hours that you need for the initial, but you can take one of those again if you want, or you can take ethics from a different source if you want, like one of the PTTCs. And always use a email that the Connecticut Certification Board can always reach you at in case you change jobs, because that's the one you're going to use for your renewal notification. So if you have a personal email, you may want to use that instead of your job email. Okay, this is a link. Here's some exam study guides in green, the green print here. Rhode Island Study Guide for Prevention Specialist Certification Exam. This is what the ICRC posts on their website, and you can download it here or from their website. It is excellent, well done, 96 pages. It's set up like a bit of a textbook to cover key topics. It includes foundation and theory and the SPIF and cultural competence, prevention ethics, and there's a practice test that you can take to prepare you. Tennessee had a draft guide. We are unable to find it, but we have a copy of it. If you want to see, it's very similar to the Rhode Island guide. It's set up a little bit different. It has a self-assessment as well as a practice test, and it has key terms set up as flashcards. So you could actually make copies of those, cut them up and, test yourself. And then there's a practice test you can take that the ICRC charges $49 for. If you're really nervous about tests, you may want to think about that. You have 30 days to complete it. You can only take it once and you cannot review your answers. It will give you feedback, but you can't download it to use as a study guide. You can't review your answers after you take the exam and get your feedback. So think about whether that cost is worth it to you. Okay, preparing for the exam. We want people to consider your learning style. Are you a visual learner? Do you appreciate reading and writing, note-taking, flashcards, diagrams, that kind of stuff? Are you an auditory learner? Do you benefit from listening and reading aloud or reciting a summary or finding a study partner or a group? Are you a kinesthetic learner? Doing or experiencing, working in short blocks of time, building models physically or in your head and moving around while studying. And one of the things you can do is create some study checklists, focus on the key content areas, the key terms and concepts, and review the questions in the study guide for how questions can be worded. And these are all from the Tennessee guide that's no longer available, but we have a copy of it. What to expect at the exam. We emphasize wellness, eat well, sleep well before the exam. You have to bring a valid government issued photo ID to prove you are you, and that letter from the CCB, the Connecticut Certification Board, the candidate admission letter that says that you are, your application has been approved and you have permission to take the exam. Because they want to make sure there isn't any fraud, that somebody's taking the exam for somebody else. Arrive early, give yourself time to find it, to park, that kind of stuff. We talked about the brief tutorial in the survey. You cannot bring any personal items in to the testing center. They'll have you take your coat and tote bag or whatever and put it in a locker. But they provide pens and scratch paper by the computer. And we already talked about the practice exam. Test taking tips. And again, this is from the Tennessee guide. Pace yourself while you're taking the tests. Robin Cox, some of you may know, she retired a couple of years ago, I think before COVID or during COVID, retired, and she took a look at one of the questions and she says, oh my goodness, I'm not sure about this. What am I doing? So she started at the back end of the test and went backwards. And she found the test, the way they had the questions organized, those were easier. So she built her confidence by answering those first. So there's no right way or wrong way to go through the exam, but pace yourself, keep an eye on the clock, read all the instructions, each question, possible answers very carefully. Look for some key words. Pay attention to some of those tricky things like all of the above or none of the above or every, all, none, always, only. You can eliminate obviously wrong answers. Do not overanalyze the questions. In fact, the CCB says when you're looking at a question, think about the test as like a college exam. You know, what would the textbook say? What would the best practice say? Don't think necessarily about how you may have adapted this in your community and done something different. Really think about, you know, best practices. If you do not have an answer, skip the question and come back to it later. That's where you can, you know, click on a yellow light by the question and it will show up as something you can go back to. Make an educated guess. There is no penalty for wrong answers. You don't lose points. Answer every question, stay calm and breathe. You can take the test again if you want. Of course, you have to pay the fee. Oh, and one of the things that I wanted to mention is when it's time for you to take the test and register, once you register and get into the system, you have a 90-day window to take the test, 3 months. If you go through that 3 months without taking the test, then you have to pay the testing fee again and get a new username and password. So you want to take it. You don't want to register into the testing system until you feel somewhat comfortable about taking the test or say, I have time to prepare for it. We recommend within the 90 days, take the test in the first 45 if you can. Because if for some reason you have to cancel your testing date and change it, you still have 45 days left to schedule it. Where if you schedule at the very end and have to reschedule, then you'd have to pay your fee again. Does that make sense? And you can cancel and reschedule, I think, within 2 weeks. And after 2 weeks, I don't know, you would have to contact them to see what, you know, if there are any exceptions and what they are. You know, like death in a family might be one. I don't know. That's something you'd have to check out. But this is some of the test taking tips. We're going to leave time for questions. This is our website. And if you go to our website, you will see a section on the CPS under professional development and trainings. And it gives you links to several of the things, the CCB, the ICR, the applications. And I'm going to stop screen sharing.